welcome. I'm Bernice Ross, the CEO and President of Brokerage and RealEstateCoach.com, and I'm delighted to welcome a longtime friend. Jimmy Mackin is the co-founder of Curator, their CEO, and he is one of the brightest minds in the industry. In fact, Jimmy, when I first met you and you were in your 20s, I think you told me you were a 40-year-old in your 20s. You were one of the wisest people I ever met in your 20s. So, as you're into your 30s now.
Yes. Well,
delighted to have you with us. You have just done extraordinary work with Curaytor, and because we do have an audience that may not be familiar with what Curaytor is, could you say a little bit about your company? And then you have a new book out. We're going to be talking about what you need to do to really succeed in today's competitive environment against places like Zillow and iBuyers, and mistakes people are making, because you've got all this data. You see hundreds of thousands of interactions every year for what your company does. So just tell us real briefly what Curaytor does, and then let's talk about your new book.
Sure. So at Curator, we have a very simple philosophy, which is attract, don't chase, which is to say that we believe that creating high quality marketing campaigns generates the best sales opportunities. So we focus and we teach and we coach our customers on how to do that using digital marketing. That includes things like creating content that attracts people to your website, that solves their problems, advertising to reach new people, using email marketing to stay engaged with these individuals, and then approaching or tying it all together and using sales to effectively follow up the right way. And we got our claim to fame early, Bernice, by being sort of the Facebook company, people that were using Facebook very early on in the space. But we've become much more of a full service marketing company, marketing sales company over the last 8 years, because we had to provide the whole suite of services to our customers. And that's what's really helped drive our success over the years.
Well, and so let's talk about your new book, just released. Can you say a little bit about that, please?
Well, I had the opportunity to work with two of the best and brightest in sales, my partner, Chris Smith, and best-selling author, Phil M. Jones. And for your audience, I know Chris Smith's been on the podcast. I know who Chris Smith is, author of The Conversion Code, author of People Work. Phil M. Jones is someone this industry doesn't really know a lot about, but he's someone who has trained over 2 million salespeople. He is, in my opinion, sort of a modern-day Zig Ziglar. He is providing the industry that every industry that he touches, which is many, with tactics and strategies in the sales space that I don't think that people really are really ready for, in the sense that his approach is so unique and so logical and so common sense that it immediately takes hold. One example of this, his Audible book that he wrote prior to partnering with us, is actually the most listened to book in Audible history. And that includes, to be clear, non-business books, meaning the people who actually listen to his book complete it at a higher percentage than any other book in Audible. So he is an absolute legend in sales, and this industry has no idea who he is. So one of the opportunities that we had to partner with Phil, because we brought Phil into our conference a couple of years ago, Bernice, we had Phil come to our conference and present his talk about sales. And then we immediately knew we had to partner with him to bring his lessons to our industry and make it relevant for, the everyday realtor.
So if people want to order your book, which is
Exactly What to Say for Real Estate Agents.
And you just released that. So tell me, what are some of the kinds of things that you see? Let's talk about, first of all, what you're seeing right now in the space in terms of marketing for real estate. And then let's talk about the mistakes that people are making, and then we'll talk about some of the solutions that are in your book.
Yeah, sure. So from a marketing perspective, what we're seeing right now is agents are very desperately trying to figure out a path to create sustainable growth for their business. As it stands today, if you are in marketing right now, you understand it's pros only. Meaning a few years ago, you could throw up a Facebook page, run a couple ads, maybe start a YouTube channel. And the sheer nature of not having a lot of competition from a business perspective, specifically in real estate, allowed you to stand out. It allowed you to get a little bit of traction. It allowed you to build somewhat of an audience. That's no longer the case. These products, these solutions, these services now have mass adoption in both areas, consumer and business. As a result of that, the need as an agent to not only be there, but to be great and to be able to stand out is a requirement. because it's become so busy and so noisy that if you just simply have a YouTube channel and you have a low production, low quality video with not great content, you're not going to reach consumers in any meaningful way. So the challenges that we're seeing right now for the average agent out there is how can they make a commitment to their brand, to their marketing, to their messaging that's going to allow them to rise above the noise? And how do they operationalize that? Meaning, how do they put themselves in a position where they can produce this necessary content and this necessary posts and videos while still running a crazy busy real estate company, whether it's a team, brokerage, agent? And that's the difference. And that's the difficulty that agents are going to be facing right now, Bernice, is how do you do both? Because that's the requirement to be great.
And that's a challenge because, if I'm busy seeing clients and getting my transactions closed, and hopefully I've got a transaction coordinator that's handling that, so that I'm loading off the things that, essentially for the last 5 years now, and when we see the latest NAR report, I expect to see the same thing. People are paying all this money for online leads, but only 4% of the closed listing transactions, and this has been a steady statistic now for 5 years, only 4% of the closed listing transactions came from a website that includes all the, Realtor.com, Zillow, your MLS, your personal site, your brokerage site, and, almost and close to 60 to 70% come from face-to-face contact, whether it's open house or referral or anything. So,
well, let's talk a little bit deeper about that.
You need to double down on that, getting face-to-face.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about what you just said there about the sort of discrepancy between the way people think that people close right now versus how they close, right? So you mentioned that stat of 4% of people come in through a website, and then the other 96% come in through face-to-face. And what you're tapping is
69%. So there are some other things in there besides, there's direct mail, there's TV,
I gotcha.
there are a few other things, but
the vast majority is not online from the research, is what you're saying. Right. Yeah. And what we have to understand that in that research is first and foremost, the consumer journey is very messy, meaning that oftentimes the consumer attributes the last touch as the thing that sort of drove their success or drove their decision. So as an example, if I first learned about you selling real estate by walking into an open house, and let's say when I went home, I checked you out on Instagram, I went to your website, and then I picked up the phone and called you, I wouldn't say, hey, I found you on Instagram, I saw it, and I went to your website. I would say, hey, I met you at this open house. But I vetted you. I did a little bit of research about you. And what we have to understand, and this is what one of the wonderful things that your audience should pay attention to, is Google has this blog they put out called Think with Google, and it studies consumer trends across every industry. And one of the things that's defining the industry as it stands today, consumer behavior, is we are research obsessed. And your audience needs to sort of internalize that for 1 second. We are research obsessed. So the interaction, as you described, may be a direct mail. That might be the stimulus. Open house, face-to-face, connecting with someone within your network. But there's sort of this whole series of events that happen below the surface that either reassure the consumer they're making the right decision or to get them to change their mind and move on to somebody else. So the challenge is, and I wish it was this simple, Bernice, but it ain't. I wish it was as simple as, we'll just double down on those sort of key areas that drive consumer behavior. And the reality is that the consumer's journey takes them from both an offline, face-to-face, and an online digital experience. And the best brands in the world are trying to sort of marry those two things together in a really cohesive way. They're trying to make sure that their positioning, their messaging, their marketing offline, face-to-face, is also what represents their brand online when they're searching digitally across social and the web.
Well, it strikes me one of the strategies that I've seen that's been working over the last 2 decades is this notion of, and it really dates back to the last century, is this notion of being the mayor of your neighborhood, if you will. That person, you're the expert in a very niched area, and that's the way the big brands. And this goes back to Marketing Warfare, which is a 2 decades old book. They say that you have to the way to compete is, if you're an individual, is you compete based upon being an expert in the niche, because the big guys won't compete for the little tiny part of the market. Now, what are you with your agents that you're working with at Curaytor in terms of what's working for them?
Well, what you described is exactly what's working for them. which is, and there's a wonderful book that I just came across by a woman named April Dunford. Her book is called Obviously Awesome, and it's all about positioning. It's a great title, right? It's all about positioning. And one of the things that is so compelling about what she says and what she teaches in her book about positioning, because positioning is very different than marketing. She talks about this idea of giving the consumer the context they need to sort of properly frame who you are and what you do. So in the context of real estate, if you are spread across an entire area, it's difficult, or in a lot of cases spread across a bunch of different price ranges, it's difficult for the consumer to sort of latch hold of who you are and what makes you different, what makes you special, what makes you unique, and why they should hire you. What they're trying to do in their minds, and they're trying to sort of do this in a split second, is saying, is this person going to be able to help me? And they define me as the area that I live in, the school district I want to live in, or I want my kids to go to, the price range that I'm trying to buy, or the price range that I'm selling my home in. Like, they're making that determination by simply looking at the copy on your website, the emails they're receiving, the ads they see, the postcards they see, or even just your face-to-face interaction. Let's take an example of this, Bernice. Let's say let's say you were the realtor, and let's say I had a $300,000 house in the suburbs of New Hampshire. And the first thing that you show up, you look great, you're clearly a professional, and then you drive up in a brand new Tesla, and then you come out of your car and you say, you start talking to me, and the first thing you mention is that you just sold a $6 million house. Well, you may be the perfect agent for me, meaning you have the experience, the talent, the track record, but you just told me you sold a $6 million house and I own a $300,000 home, colonial in the suburbs. I immediately associate you as a luxury agent. So I just think you're too good for me. You're too, she's too expensive. She's too good for me, right? So I immediately make that association. Now, that example we're sharing in the real world happens online. It happens based off your messaging and your branding on your website. Like, that determination happens online. So that's the challenge that we're seeing. And to echo your original point, which is you've got to decide what that sort of battlefield you want to compete on is. And you've got to focus on owning that.
Jimmy makes such a good point. And this is something I learned early on, because I was with the company that was a very luxury company. Mm-hmm. And because I was with them, people would say, well, I don't know if you want to, we're selling $1 million listings, and they're saying, you don't want to take my condo for $250 or $300. I'm thinking, yes, I do, because
yeah. Oh yeah.
Scarcity of listings in the West Side is one thing, but the other thing that you come back around to is that, and it's one of the things I think is such a good idea to do when you at the end of the year, or right now, regardless of where you are, is look at the last 12 months of your production and look at look at the ages and the type of work, the mm-hmm. location that you're attracting in terms of clients, and build your business on what you're attracting. Yeah. And instead of trying to be all things to all people, hey, if you're going to have a luxury business and you're going to have a entry-level business, you better have 2 separate websites that meet those needs. And your pictures on those sites need to look like the clients that buy from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an excellent point. And you're right about going back and looking at the people you naturally attract to your business as a way to sort of shape your future. What we like to do is for our customers, we say, don't forget what makes you great, because it's easy to look at the competition to see what other people are doing, especially in real estate, Bernice, and you know this. Everybody in real estate sticks their head up, looks at the competition, tries to figure out what they're doing, tries to see, what's working for them, and then tries to sort of internalize and copy for their business. But you're copying someone else's blueprint. It ain't yours. It's not your brand. It's not your marketing. It's not your positioning. And as a result of that, it doesn't feel authentic, doesn't feel real, and it causes confusion for the consumer. So what you're describing is about this idea of sort of being a little bit reflective to understand where to go forward. It's something that oftentimes, and when you're running a business, you never have the time or luxury to do. But as you know, it adds a lot of value long-term to help provide a little bit of sanity and clarity for the business that you're trying to run.
Well, this is what they talk about in the E-Myth Revisited.
Mm-hmm.
You need to take time to work on your business and do that at least once a week, where you're looking at where your deals are coming from, also tracking what's going on in the MLS. If you're working in an area, all of a sudden it's gotten quiet and the area adjacent to where you're working is hot, move
Yeah,
your efforts
sure.
over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I think, but your original question was the mistakes that agents are making. And you talked a little bit about, not sort of picking a niche. The other thing that you and I both believe and we're both passionate about is the mistake agents are making right now is they're taking the human being out of the transaction. And they're trying to replace having conversations with consumers with things like automation or bots. And there's a philosophy that we have at Curator that helps drive some of our decisions here, which is we believe that you should treat every lead like they're your only customer. And what happens when you start to treat leads like they're your customer, they become them. And that is a fundamental mind shift change. And what our audience who's listening today, Bernice, needs to understand is that if we treated customers like the way we treat leads, we wouldn't have any customers. You have the data on this, Bernice. You know the stats behind this. The amount of people that get ignored when they fill out a form on the web, the amount of times that we call them back, the information that we provide, the sort of hard pitches that we offer as soon as they pick up the phone. You hear stupid strategies like 10 days of pain or 14 days of torture, and like as if a consumer wants to experience that. I had Melanie Diesel on my podcast, Water Cooler, a few weeks ago. Melanie Diesel she's a journalist for the New York Times, and she just started her own brand called Story Fuel. And she's putting out a new book right now about content in the coming months. And one of the things that she talked about, because I asked her this question, I said, hey, Melanie, as an outsider who is clearly, successful, affluent, has a great career, probably going to be buying and selling real estate in the next couple of years. What do you look for in a realtor? And I went down the list with her. I said, hey, if a realtor calls you 5 times in 5 days, right, and you don't pick up the first few times, like how does that make you feel? And she's like, it immediately turns me off. It immediately repels me from that person because they just look desperate. So what we have to do from the perspective of sales, going back to the original point of like putting the human back in the transaction, Bernice, we've got to start treating our leads like they are customers. We do not harass, bombard, overwhelm our customers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in business. So the reason that we treat leads this way is because we have too many of them in a lot of cases. Or we, at least in a lot of cases, we don't think we have enough, but we generally have too many. We don't prioritize them the right way. We don't follow up the right way. We don't identify the ones that follow up the right way. So we just sort of treat everyone the same. And as a result, it creates a whole myriad of problems. And I'm sure you've got data on the average lead conversion ratio for internet leads. Last study I looked at, it was like 0. Right?
No, it's about 1 to 2%. If you're really good, you might get 4 to 6%. But
yeah, it's low is the point, and it's really, really low. And it's funny because all these constructs we've put around or built up around us, like ISA programs and drip campaigns and automation, and like all these things are like geared towards like helping finding the right person. But once we find that right person, we generally sort of screw it up by treating them like a lead, and we sort of rush them through the process, right? There's a restaurant here, Bernice, around the corner called Neptune Oysters in Boston. It's the most famous seafood restaurant in the North End. If you go on Yelp or TripAdvisor, they have thousands of 5-star reviews. And the one thing that's interesting is I've gone there a couple dozen times because it's literally 200 feet from our office. And the last time I went in there, I've had dozens of good experiences. The last time I went in there, as soon as we sat down, they asked us what we wanted to eat. And as soon as we finished eating, they put the check on the table. Now, I get it because they're a busy restaurant. They want to turn tables. But that little subtle signal that they sent to us left me with a negative impression of a brand that I already knew, liked, and trust, right? So I think real estate agents, generally speaking, need to be very aware of the impression they leave with consumers by studying the way in which they follow up with people. And that is an important point your audience needs to understand. Start to sort of put yourself on the other side of the table. If I were treated the way that I'm treating them, would I have a positive impression of your brand? And the answer, if we're being honest with ourselves, objectively speaking, is usually no, Bernice.
Now, Jimmy, so we've talked about some of the mistakes. One of the things that you talk about in your book is how to handle objections, what to say.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give us some of the takeaways from that book, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 of them to
Sure.
kind of wrap up for our show today, and then one final takeaway, of course. But what are some of the key things that you've seen that your clients have really responded to well and that has worked?
It's this has probably been one of the most fun parts of writing this book. Is initially in the research part of this process, we went through and we interviewed agents. We did a tremendous amount of research of seeing what are the common, critical, and difficult conversations they have every single day. And one of the things that surprised me, the things that actually that was really eye-opening for me as not someone who was not a real estate agent, was a lot of the stress and pressure agents feel, Bernice, has nothing to do with lead conversion. It has to do with servicing, meaning that like handling the price reduction conversation, being at a listing appointment where all, it's high stake. This is sort of a make or break moment. Those moments are the ones that cause them the most amount of anxiety and where they feel the most ill-equipped to succeed. So I'll give you an example of how most people handle objections. And let's do a little role play with me. And I want you to put your average agent hat on for a second. Okay. So you just completed your listing presentation. You walked through all the things that you're going to do for me. You talked about the marketing. You talked about your service. You talked about your past experience. Now, as a consumer, I'm going to say to you, Bernice, well, Bernice, everything sounded great. We really like what you presented today, and we think that you do a great job. But you charge 6% commission. And I was just driving down the street, and I saw that Redfin is actually offering, listings for 1%. Now, why would I pay you 3%, 6% when Redfin's charging 1%?
The average agent won't have a solution to that, but I have.
Yeah. What do you think the average agent says? Let's put your
Average
average agent.
well, they'll struggle with that because they don't really understand the nature and the offering. But the problem that I see with agents is that they instead of, they're going to go into what I call tell mode. They're going to go in to explain why you should hire me. Well, Redfin's not doing all these services, or you're getting, yes, you're getting the exposure, blah, blah, blah. Now, how would you answer it though? That's the question.
Well, you just described it perfectly, which is, you said they go into what they refer to as feature dump mode, where they immediately start to respond to an objection by answering the objection with a bunch of just information that overwhelms the consumer, right? And so that feature dump, not only does it show a sense of weakness and lack of confidence in your services and your offering, but the other thing it does, it makes one very big mistake, Bernice. It assumes that the question is the question. And that's not always the case. You and I have done now, between the two of us, probably thousands of interviews, right? The question isn't always the question. You have to clarify what the real objection is, or what they really mean by that, before you can even answer the question. So what I would do in a situation like that, and what we coach in the book, is we would go along the lines of asking them a clarifying question, which we might say, help me understand what you know about the difference between a full service agent and an online brokerage. And we'll just shut up at that point. And this is where we basically allow them to say, well, we don't really know the difference between the two companies. We just saw the 1%. We just saw that you're charging more. Great. Now they've given me permission to talk about the difference between those two. Now they may at that point already sort of like, oh, I was just curious. I'm not even really that interested in that. I'm just curious. They may even just sort of bow out at that moment as soon as you ask that question. So that is a very simple magic word we have in the book, which is help me understand, which is you're asking them to help clarify the question they just asked you. And what most people do with an objection, as you described, is they sort of immediately go into tell mode, or we refer to as feature dump mode. And that does not accomplish the goal of actually having a meaningful conversation that moves forward towards a close.
Jimmy, you just hit on one of my favorite scripts when they say, well, I just want to talk to the listing agent, or, or what I want you to do. If we have to pay the buyer's agent X, then you need to take a 1% reduction of Y. And the response to that is exactly what you said. Help me understand how it helps you to pay the person who has a fiduciary duty to help this seller get the highest possible price, and how that person can help you get the best possible price for, in this particular situation. And I want to I want to circle back. One of my favorite questions, it's a little bit differently, but the question, what they're really asking you underneath that, the question you proposed about, the 1% versus 3%. And the question I like to ask is it correct to assume that you want to get the highest price possible for your property in the shortest amount of time? They're going to say yes. And with your permission, may I show you my premium marketing plan that helps you get the highest possible price in the shortest amount of time. And you tie Redfin to limited service. I love how you tied it to online versus full service. So you want to, when you talk about yourself, assuming you're in the full service model, I think you nailed it. You want to distinguish yourself as the premium agent. Just absolutely. Well, I see our time's just about up. One final takeaway, and they can get your book either through your website or on Amazon?
Yeah, we're on Amazon and we're on Audible. I was in the New York studio recording with Phil and Chris, so you guys can listen to my voice on Audible, and we are obviously on Amazon, where you can buy exactly what to say for real estate agents. So you asked for me for one more takeaway, and this is something that is, to me, probably one of the sort of hidden gems in the book. And this is something that we had a gentleman who wrote the book called Never Lose a Customer, Joey Coleman, best-selling author, #2 on Wall Street Journal. He came on the podcast a few weeks ago, and I asked him the question. I said, what are you looking for in a realtor, Joey? And he says, I want someone who listens. I mean, really listens to my needs. Really listens to my needs. And that's one of the best ways you can show that you can add value, is by listening to their needs. Now, there's 2 techniques you can use. And one of them is from someone who I admire and love, a gentleman by the name Chris Voss, who wrote a book called Never Split the Difference. And one of them is called mirroring, which is you're repeating the last 3 words that they say to you. So they say, I'm looking to buy a house in the North End for under $150,000. You say, okay, so in the North End under $150,000. You're mirroring the last 3 words. So they say they feel like they're being heard. But one of the words, so it's just a really important technique. It's not in our book, it's in Chris Voss's book, but I just love it. I think your audience needs to embrace it. It's a great way to sort of like show that you're listening without just like sitting there listening. The second thing is, it's a technique they use in journalism too, in the interviews. The second thing is asking the question, how important is it to you? To help gauge what their underlying motivators are. So if you can ask the question, how important is it to you that you move before the end of the year, before the holidays? This will help you understand their time. Well, it's incredibly important to me. And then you can start saying, well, because you told me it was incredibly important to you to move before the holidays, we've got to develop a plan to help you accomplish those goals. If you assume you know what their goals are, you cannot provide the service that they expect. So one of the words that we coach in the book and that we teach in the book is, how important is it? How important is it to you that you sell your house this spring? How important is it to you that you, as you said, get the most amount of money for the sale of your home in the quickest amount of time? How important is it to you that the money, that the profits you get from this home contribute towards a down payment of your next home? How important is it to you that you find a home that you want to buy before you decide to list the home you want to sell? Like, how important is it to you allows you to understand at the deepest level the motivators that are going to drive their decision. And if you understand those motivators, then you can begin to be the expert and guide them through the process using the skills and the experience and knowledge that you have as a professional real estate agent and realtor.
Oh, Jimmy, that's a great way to end. We've been visiting with Jimmy Mackin. He's the co-founder and CEO of Curaytor. You can find them online at Curaytor. You see right back there, Curaytor. Yeah, Curaytor.com. And be sure to pick up a copy of their book. I can't recommend this highly enough, because the quality of what the two of you write, on your own, much less what, having the help with this other gentleman. What was his name again?
Phil M. Jones.
Phil M. Jones. Thank you. Chris, you and Chris have done an amazing job on this, Jimmy. So thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely, Bernice. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. Appreciate it.